Hello, welcome to this presentation of my allegorical analysis of the Dragon of Wantley. Who does this dragon think he is? The Dragon of Wantley is based on an old broadside ballad from 1685 that was turned into a burlesque opera in 1737. It tells the story of how a dragon was terrorizing a town until it was defeated by the knight Moore of Moore Hall. There are two key elements of burlesque opera. It is a work of parody, and it is mocking someone or something, keeping in mind that both of these elements need to be recognized as such. The libretto is by Henry Carey, or as he is signed here, Signor Carini. Carey was a moderately successful satirist and musician. The music is by John Frederick Lampe. Lampe made the journey from Germany to England as Handel's bassoonist and wrote in a similar style. While we're talking about Lampe, we can start getting to the meta subjects of the Dragon of Wantley. The parody is easy. They're parodying Handel. Between Lampe's mimicry of Handel's opera seria style, the mimicking of storytelling conventions that appear in Handel's works such as these five, the fact that Handel's Giustino had premiered the year prior, which itself featured a dragon-like beast, and that it wouldn't be the first time Handel's style had been parodied, meaning a precedent had already been set, we're not going to run that race. We're good. The question that needs answering: who is this work supposed to be mocking? We know it's mocking someone because the label of burlesque opera, which was applied by Carey, demands a mockery subject. The popular theory is that the dragon is supposed to be Walpole. I think this is dubious, but this takes some time to explain. Initially, the opera was not well received. After 3 performances at the Haymarket Theatre in May 1737, it would not return until October of the same year. Upon its return, it would enjoy regular performances from 1738 to 1782. This stretch of 45 years marks the work as a success, not to mention the commissioning of a sequel, Marjorie, or a worse plague than the dragon. Concerning activity between the May production and the October production, it is worth noting that the Licensing Act of 1737 was instituted that June. The Licensing Act was a form of censorship meant to control what was being said about the government on the stage. Sir Robert Walpole, the Lord Chamberlain and the executor of the Act, was a common target in theatre and is often assumed to be the mockery subject of this opera. That the opera's reception changes so much after the Licensing Act makes me skeptical about what's going on here. I think we are dealing with one of 3 possibilities. 1. The opera didn't change much in those 4 months, but the Licensing Act censored all of the more biting satirical works being performed, leaving the less egregious dragon opera to reap the benefits. 2. The opera changed a lot in those 4 months, potentially reducing the severity of its attack on Walpole to the point that it passed by the censors, but it carried with it a previous reputation that is difficult to deduce without discovery of a pre-Licensing Act edition. 3. The work doesn't actually mock Walpole. Carey's original contributions to the story concern love triangles, jealousy, and romantic folly, similar subjects that he would revisit in the sequel. So I went back and looked at the symbolism associated with the original ballad, thinking that might lead me somewhere. Starting with what dragons represent in English folklore. For the sake of time, I'll just say that dragons are almost always portrayed as monsters in English folklore, and that they are often associated with power, evil, and defending resources. If we consider how those properties might be personified, this begins to paint a picture of the kind of individual who might be the Dragon of Wantley. In Thomas Percy's Relics of Ancient English Poetry, he offers a footnote that suggests who the ballad's dragon was supposed to represent. In what he calls the key to the satire, he relays an account of Godfrey Bosville, who claims the story is based on a lawsuit between the Bosvilles and the Wortleys. In short, the Bosvilles paid tithes to the Wortleys who tried to increase the amount they were due. The Bosvilles retaliated in court, and after a lengthy legal battle, the amount they were found to owe ended up significantly reduced. The whole thing feels flimsy. First off, Percy's Relics wasn't published until 1767, so these accounts are hearsay. Also, both Bosville and Wortley show up in Debrett's Peerage, a listing of notable lords. So if this is the inspiration for the ballad, it's not so much man overcoming mythical challenge as it is two dudes arguing about money. So, if this key to the satire is to be believed, the dragon was a lord, the townsfolk was another, less wealthy lord, and Moore is an unnamed lawyer. I've heard dumber reasons to write epics, but let's move on. In an essay by Moxon, which makes a point of refuting Percy, it is suggested that the key to deciphering the ballad rests with uncovering Moore, not the dragon. In Moxon's major reappraisal, he suggests that while the combat/lawsuit may have indeed been about tithes, the ballad is actually a comment on the Counter-Reformation. Moxon contends that the legal battle at hand refers to a conflict between George Moore, of Moore Hall, and George Talbot, Duke of Shrewsbury. The 1573 lawsuit is similar in that it is tied to Sheffield land and the aggravation of tithes, but the allegiances of the parties involved suggest an additional layer. The Duke of Shrewsbury was loyal to the Protestant Queen Elizabeth I, and was the lord entrusted to keep Mary Queen of Scots under house arrest after her imprisonment in 1569. While Moxon leaves George Moore's allegiance a question, it is possible that the George Moore in this account is the same George Moore referenced in Reed's Plots and Counterplots. Reed notes that a George Moore was responsible for conveying correspondence to and from Mary Queen of Scots during the Throgmorton and Babington plots. This suggests George Moore may have been an agent of the Counter-Reformation, or at least performed actions in the movement's favor. In further support of this theory, Moxon notes that the Warncliffe Lodge was locally known as Matthew's House. This is mentioned in another footnote in Percy's Relics. Moxon uses Matthew's House to invoke the Christian St. Matthew and the Christian interpretation of St. George and the Dragon. With this interpretation, the figures of Moore and the Dragon come to represent the heroic Counter-Reformation and the monstrous Protestant establishment. Making this theory more interesting are the dates. The Catholic James II was crowned in 1685, the same year the ballad was published. If we assume this theory, it is possible that this ballad was published in support of the Catholic monarch. While the history of the ballad suggests one of two lawsuits might be the basis for the original dragon metaphor, both lawsuits dealing with the act of monetary extortion, one of which suggesting a political/religious layer, whether Carey and Lamb were fully familiar with the background of the ballad is difficult to ascertain. Going theory by theory, if we focus on the tithes, those are a form of taxation. Walpole was the Prime Minister imposing the taxes. Sure, that fits fine, but it's not like there's any night to fight taxes. After all, it's one of the great certainties besides death and sequels. The Counter-Reformation reading could work if it's an indictment of both sides. Between the dragon's monstrousness and Moore's boorishness, whichever side is painted as the dragon, the other is being painted as a drunken lout. Also, I get the feeling that if the censors sniffed that quality of attack, it may not have survived the Licensing Act. I suspect it's a case of bandwagon jumping. Sir Robert Walpole had previously been the target of Gay's opera seria parody, The Beggar's Opera. The Dragon of Wantley followed the precedent set by Gay's work and combined it with a popular folktale that lent itself well to burlesque. Whether or not Walpole was being mocked, audiences recognized all of the other attributes being carried over and assumed Walpole was also under fire in this opera. Regardless of who was the original target, that the opera didn't find success until after Walpole's Licensing Act of 1737 invites speculation that the monster of the story became Walpole because of the censorship crap that he pulled. As far as who Moore of Moore Hall might be, the Licensing Act targets playwrights and librettists. That Cary's The Dragon of Wantley found so much success after the establishment of the Licensing Act could suggest a retroactive reframing, making Moore a self-insert for the satirist Henry Carey. And that's where I'll end today. Thank you very much.